Okay, any questions? Problem set 4 was just turned in. A couple people have asked for and been granted small extensions on that, so I'm not going to be talking through the solution set today. But anything that came up that you found interesting, appalling, strange? Adam?
Yeah, for the T and the I used that O of n factorial algorithm.
The O of n factorial algorithm. How high can n get?
25.
25. For what?
So if I had 25 notes and I was trying to find optic or OBDC, it turns out within a few seconds.
Yep. So with the O, so you have an O of n factorial algorithm, which is usually one of the worst you'd ever be thinking about, except for n to the n. N to the n's worse, right? I can't remember. These are the types of things that, as a professional music person, you don't really have to think. Once you're thinking about things this bad, you usually don't. But yeah, 25 was the number that I was weirdly thinking that would constrain n. Anybody have a different number that often comes up in music for the max, the n? Yeah?
12.
12, with 12 pitches. So you can end up with an algorithm that is O of 12 factorial, which is decently big, but not too bad, which reduces to O of 1. Very slow one, but O of 1. So I don't think that would be that bad. I believe there is an algorithm that runs in O of n time, I believe. Yeah, or it might be O of n squared. I'll look back at it. So there is a way to go better. But good. For this class, again, you're not going to be quizzed on your algorithmic complexity of your work, but it's always a good thing to be thinking about as we do things. I took the summer to look through all the places where I wasn't using heap tables. I don't know if anybody, do they cover heaps in 6009 or in 6006? Okay, yeah, so the idea of an organization that allows you to at any point get the smallest or the largest value, but not everything else is sorted. And that can be a very useful tool often, but good. But most of the things aren't going to be on that. Any other questions or concerns that come up? I'll be curious after class to figure out where 25 comes from.
No, I just put in 25 notes and then C actually killed a lot of them.
Yeah. So as long as you do your cardinality or your, what's the other one? Oh, yeah, but what's the octave? Yeah, sorry, I was hearing optic, but you were saying octave, which is correct. As long as you've done something like that, you're probably the OPC, which is almost always a requirement for using T or I, because the transposition operation the transposition and inversion operations can, in some cases, not be well defined, especially if you're thinking of a chord. When you invert it, does the order of the notes change? In a melody, the order, obviously matters more. Good. Yeah.
Can you give some intuition for when inversion is useful? In doing an assignment, it's just hard for me to wrap my mind around.
Yeah. So when is it useful? One of the first reasons why it can be useful is a lot of composers have thought it's useful, including tonal composers like Bach, but 20th century composers like Arnold Schoenberg or Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, they've used inversion symmetry a lot. The other thing is that things that are inversions of each other have the same interval structure. So if you're playing with a piece and you're thinking about, how can I reuse those intervals? That can be a place that's done. I think it's you can Google online people singing "Happy Birthday" in inversion and stuff like that. So quite a number of people do hear it in special cases as an equivalence class, as we saw with the Gustav Holst example, where the 6th time through the Chaconne theme, he decides to play it upside down. Do you remember that from the band thing that we have? So that's one of the places that's there. I think we've moved to a world that's different from even 25, 30 years ago, where it was this notion that, oh, eventually we're all going to hear inversions the way we hear transpositions. And I think that that's not something composers are asserting as much. Great question. Other things? There was one case, and I haven't run your thing through it, that is interesting, that almost all, here, I'll just go over here, almost all musical structures that have the same, built on the same numbers of intervals, like once you do reduce them octave equivalent and so on, such as, here we have a major third, especially if we don't care about spelling, and here we have a minor third, and together we have a perfect fifth. And here we have minor, major, perfect fifth, major triad, minor triad. Most cases, the chords that have the same interval content can be transposed or inverted to make each other. And the cool thing is there's a very few exceptions to that rule. The most famous one is any transposition or inversion of this. I'll use pitch class numbers 0, 1, 3, 7. So that's, and 0, 1, 4, it's terrible, it's an E, 4, 6, 0, 1, 4, 6. Somebody, while I'm getting a new pen, verify that those have the same interval content. Do they both have a semitone somewhere? Yeah, between the 0 and the 1, right? Do they both, sorry, you do need that better pen before you do it. Do they both have a whole step? Yeah, where's the whole step in the first one? 1 to 3, yep, it's written this way with spelling things, so it's a little bit hard. Do they both have a minor third?
Yeah.
Do they both have a major third?
Yes.
This one's a little bit harder. Yeah, so two things at 4, there's the major third, it's a major third. Do they both have a perfect fourth? Yeah. And yeah, where's the perfect fourth in this? So this one's pretty easy. And here the perfect fourth is, because we have octave equivalents, we just move this one up, and then we get a perfect fourth. And do they have a tritone? Diminished or augmented triad. Yeah, this one's pretty easy because there's a tritone from the lowest to highest, and here it's between the first and the last. This one's particularly interesting because any 4-note chord will have 6 intervals in it. And if we think of how many semitones, how many whole steps, how many minor thirds, major thirds, perfect fourths, tritones, and everything else above that is just an inversion of these. They each have 1. So these are sometimes called the all-interval tetrachords. And the fascinating thing is that you cannot invert one to make the other. There's only a few things like this, and they're called Z-related. Nobody really knows what the Z stands for. It's not a Russian propaganda thing or whatever. So they're Z-related, and they always come in pairs. If we use a 16-tone system, then all the Z-related things come in triples. And somebody has worked out the math. If we use a 30-tone system, they all come in groups of 5 and stuff. And it's one of these things that those of us in the music theory have never worked with a mathematician to figure out what the general pattern is of where Z-related systems come. Okay, nice little aside. But kind of the fun things you can do if you're doing a little bit more pure math side and less computation. Yeah, Jake.
That'd be an interesting final project.
That would be
Ambitious.
a final project that have a backup plan. because do not bet your entire grade on being able to figure it out. But yeah, enumerating various things, and yep, would be great. And a lot of people who are interested in post-tonal music will be interested in that. Good. Okay. Let's move off the computer. We've gone from computer to math to, let's go to pure music. I'm going to play in a second, but you can get started. The chorale that I've passed out for you, the class theme chorale, Alleluia, Alleluia chorale. And your job, talk with other people around this, is first to spend, let's spend 5 minutes just doing whatever Roman numeral or other analysis you've been taught on this project. And let's not all start at the beginning so that some of us can have some interesting comments about the end or something, but just pretty 5 minutes until I give more instructions. And if you talk with each other, you'll make fewer mistakes. Okay, let's bring it back for a second. Everybody? I'm going to start by asking people for something that they found interesting. Let's number, guys. Let's number our measures. So measure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Did I count that right? So when you say if there's something interesting in a specific place that I want to know it. We'll jump around a little bit. Jason, what did you find that's interesting?
I believe the phrase starting at the end of the first measure, the Alleluia. I think it's 5-1-5-1, and then in A major.
5-1-5-1.
And then the following one is basically 5-1-5-1, but in F sharp minor instead.
Oh, so your interesting thing is that we have some sort of I don't know, what do you call it? Modulating sequence, or repetition on different keys. This is the one I wanted to get rid of. Good. Let's see. Who hasn't been calling in a while? Angelica?
It's weird that they chose the F sharp minor because if you're looking at it in A major, it's like it goes to the major third a lot. That's kind of weird for it.
So we're starting in A major, and then it goes to the, what'd you say?
When it goes to F sharp minor, it's a weird key to like go from A major because it goes between like the sixth and the major third a lot.
So it goes down a sixth, and then what? Then
like it goes between a major third and the sixth chord, minor sixth.
Oh, it goes from a minor sixth chord to a major sixth chord at some point. Cool. Great. Super. Very interesting. We'll keep going. Who hasn't been called? Jordan?
Something interesting, I guess, is I was trying to figure out what the chord was when you look at measure 2, the last chord. Yeah, I don't know what to call that.
Yeah. Who gave a label to a chord here? Okay, good. Let's see, Matthew. What label did you give it?
5/6 of 6.
5/6 of 6. And for those who don't yet translating those numbers to symbols in head, were you thinking of something like? Okay. Over time, you do learn to hear the lower cases and the slashes and the things, what's in Roman numerals and what's in Arabic. Anybody give a different thing for that? Yeah.
I kind of have a Java question.
Wait, but let's finish on this particular question. It is okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So like, I worked from the end, so yeah, I just kind of assumed it was an F sharp minor, and so like this was just like the 5/6.
So this was just in 5/6. Good. So I think we're getting to the next question. How many people noted a key change in the piece? Not everybody got far enough to do. One person did. 2 people. You presumably did or did not?
I mean, I only got through like halfway through measure 3.
That's fine. That's fine. Good. And anybody not find key change? So, John, yep. So for those who did think of a key change, where did you put the key change? Adam?
Between measure 7 and 8.
Between measure 7 and 8. 5, 6, 7, between here. Key change, good. Any other things, Jason?
I didn't get that far, but it does feel like there's a key change like between 2 and 3.
Between 2 and 3. Great. Where would we put it exactly? If you are buying Jason's thing, Adam, if you're going with Jason's, where would you put that?
In between the 2 measures of that 8-letter word within the fermata.
Oh, within
second measure, 3rd and 4th beats.
Second measure between 3rd and 4th beat, just after the fermata. Anybody would place it another place? Anybody think that, it might be ambiguous and we might be kind of floating between 2 keys for a while when we do certain key changes? Anyone ever think that? There's a type of P chord thing that begins with a P that some people use for that. Yeah, John?
Picardy?
Picardy is a type of chord, and it does apply to this piece. Where do we see some that might be a Picardy? Anybody? Picardy third, major third in a minor context. Yeah.
The very last chord.
Very last chord. Yep.
I think the P word you were looking for is pivot.
Pivot. Yep. So we went with 2 different ones. We got 2 different great P chords there. So yeah. So pivot chords are what some people use to say that, that this is the moment when we're in 2 keys for a while. And I remember asking my teachers, well, can there be a pivot region? And one teacher said, no, you choose a chord and stick to it. And then another teacher said, no, of course, there could be. So, good. A couple things. For those who did do the end or get to the end, how many thought we were in A major at the end? How many thought we were in F sharp major? How many thought we were in F sharp minor? A couple. How many thought we were in another key altogether? D Locrian. No. Okay, good. Whew. That last one's the only one that I wouldn't have liked. Somebody who thought we were in F sharp major. Explain to the F sharp minor people why they're wrong. Yeah, go ahead.
All the A sharps in the last 2 bars are indicator, but also I think we thought that the fermata measure 7 sounded like the dominant 5 but F sharp minor, but it ended up resolving into F sharp major in the next chord, which kind of persisted for the next 2 measures.
Okay, good. The couple things that I heard that's always a very good way of not necessarily winning, but advancing an analysis argument. You said, it sounded like. Good, always think and let our ears do it, not just what's written on the paper. Somebody who was an F sharp minor winner, try to convince the F sharp major people that they're wrong. Yeah, John.
For quite a bit of the piece, we hear hints a lot at F sharp minor. So we have a lot of C sharp major chords leading to F sharp minor. So the last 2 measures can kind of be seen as Bach, just kind of stylizing things, keeping it still in F sharp minor.
So a stylization, but that doesn't change. Yeah, so we can have a disagreement on this. I'm not going to say at this moment which side I'm more on because I can see the validity of both sides. I can't, because I know the world of Bach, I myself cannot really hear it as, we're still in A major and we are ending on the 6th chord, and the 6th chords are very important. But on the other hand, if I listen to a lot more contemporary popular music where 6 is a perfectly valid chord to begin on and occasionally to end on, seems quite possible. Good. So we just spent 30 minutes looking at one chorale in particular. And that's not something we're going to do very often in this class, but that is the normal way of analyzing music, right? So what want to do is to bring up the concept of what we're doing with corpus analysis, which is what we're going to be doing for most of the rest of the of this unit. So I'll just put this up for a second, and there's a way I can blank this. Does that work? Yep, there we go. So we often think, you may have heard this in one of your literature classes about close reading, where you're looking through and finding all of Mark Twain's metaphors or all of Jane Austen's foreshadowings and how many Greek-rooted words are used in this sentence, this paragraph, compared to the Latin words or the Anglo-Saxon ones and stuff. So close reading is the main type of literary analysis. Starting about, it goes back to sort of the 80s, but really in the last 20 years, there's been a movement associated with the computer called distant reading. Other people were doing this before, but the term is connected to a literary critic named Franco Moretti. And that's not going to be on an exam or anything. But so the notion is that distant reading is something you do when you're not close enough to the text to really make these kinds of precise arguments. But you are far enough away that you can see not just one text, but multiple texts. So some of us who work on corpus studies have started, in music, have started replacing these terms with close listening, which is conventional music analysis. And distant listening, which is corpus studies. What do you think some of the things that we can do with close reading or close listening better, close analysis, whatever you want to call it, better than distant analysis? Yeah.
Close analysis, we can look for specific phrases.
Specific phrases or motifs. Yep. Anything else you think? And let's think of sort of the world we're in today, not the world of 5,000 years in the future, or maybe 5 minutes, depending on what happened at OpenAI today. But where the computer can do many things that it can't do. But what are some things that we're going to start losing? Yeah. Yeah.
What makes distance listening different than close listening? Because like in a corpus study, you can study everything in close listening.
Sure. So let's think of some of the things. Let's think of some of the things. We'll go back to literature. So, what are some of the things that humans are good at in picking out of literature that computers are still not very good at? Misha?
Like more abstract, like we can be like, oh, this is an allusion to like Shakespeare. So similarly, like we can like notice patterns that like are hard to really condense into like one formula function. We can be like, oh, this like is a similar melody to like something that was used previously.
So that's a good one. Other things? What about for you? Let's start with one that's hot in my head, but I really want to make sure we don't lose track of this. Anyone have a piece of music they love? Okay, almost everybody. Good. How did you fall in love with that piece of music?
Listening to it.
Listening to it. Good. How many people have fallen in love with a piece of music via corpus studies? This one has 47% sharps. And so let's not forget that the reason why we make music and listen to it is the enjoyment happens at the close level. The other thing I was thinking of with the literature is this character. I'm reading Crying in H Mart right now. I don't know if anyone knows this memoir, but one of the characters in it is going through a very similar experience that I went through in my life, the family death, and it was very deeply resonating with me. So resonance outside your life, or not outside your life, I can't really resonate outside my life, outside the text, and we'll use text to mean both literature and music. So there are something. What are some things that, however, that distant listening or distant reading, that is to say, having a computer look at 1,000 pieces, might do better than close reading? Let's first assume we have infinite time, then close reading 1,000 pieces. Yeah.
It can allow you to more effectively, when listening to a new piece, guess who the composer was or what the time period was.
Okay. So you could use that, distant for guessing genre or period or authorship. You might be able to do that with the 1,000 scores, but that would take a lot longer. Good. What are other things we want to solve? Yeah, shoot.
I think it gives you like a less abstract way of describing any patterns you might hear. It's like easy to say something sounds similar, but actually analyzing it gives you words to put that into.
So it gives you words for describing, gives words for describing similarity. And what else besides words for describing similarity? What are some other things that we like to get out of this class? Yeah. Numbers, statistics. So these are some of the reasons why I want to be thinking this. But I think I'll just say, because I'm a couple minutes behind where I'd like to be, that the most effective way of working with any sort of new genre, new style, new anything, is to start with close listening, close reading. Start with the analysis that you've done now, and try to do things by hand before moving to the programming. How are we going to do distant listening? How are we going to teach the computer to do this? Because there's something that didn't come up, that the ambiguity and the types of I'm going to have to make a judgment call on this, on where the modulation happened. Or is this really 5, 6 of 6, or did we already jump directly to the new key? Or is this thing that I'm labeling actually a chord at all? Or is it a whole bunch of passing tones that happen to look like a chord? These kinds of ambiguities are things that that I think will come up when you're doing the close listening, close analysis, and that you'll know you have to account for them in some way during the distant analysis. And sometimes accounting for them in some way is just leaving a footnote saying, there's this really complex problem, but I only saw it twice in close listening to 4 pieces, so hopefully we can ignore it as a rounding error, but at least declaring that. Then when you've done your corpus study, there's something really valuable about finding things that are interesting there, right? What's that piece that completely throws, that outlier piece that completely throws out, and going back and listening to it, maybe it doesn't even have to be close listening, but actually just human listening, so that we get, what's the end result, why we do any of this? So we can get to the enjoyment, the point of trying to do. One of my dream projects, you all have heard of IMSLP, huge sheet music score. I want to find the most interesting, unusual piece by every minor composer that's on there, that has the thing. The one piece that this one forgotten person, that she or he wrote that we should actually be listening to. Maybe it's not even the one piece. This one 30-second excerpt that Grauber wrote that I don't know and I'd love to know it. We're not there yet, but maybe we can get there. Great. So the next thing you're going to be doing is trying to figure out what kinds of things we can do this kind of close analysis on. We did the Irish music corpus in class on Wednesday. That was a pretty small corpus, 60 pieces or something. Then online, I gave you tools for using the entire Bach chorale corpus. So if you want to find anything super unusual in there, that can be a good place. But be boring if those are the only two ones. So your next problem set, and it's up, is problem set 5. And let me put this back up here. So this one, we want to do is in groups of 2, prepare a 3 to 5 page short paper. 3 pages is totally fine. 5 pages sometimes is, might be something that you want to do. That tries to figure out some corpus that's out there that's been active in the past 10 years and try to figure out how it works. So, and why it's out there and what its extent is. So what are the goals of the project? Who are the participants? How are the scores or other musical data encoded? I think I've forgotten to put on here what's actually in there. What's the project actually trying to do? I suppose that's the goal of the project, but what pieces are collected? What is the overall extent of the problem? That is, what's it trying to solve? And how much, by doing this, and how much of the problem do you think could be reasonably solved in a limited timetable? You don't have to do all of these except for the first one, and we'll get to the last one. What are the strengths and weaknesses? And what could you do with this corpus? What questions relevant to this class could you answer by having this? Just like we did with the what questions could you answer with a whole collection of Bach chorales on, was that piece at 1 or 2 or 3 or something like that, you don't need to use the corpus to answer it. You're not being asked to download and do the things. But anyhow, you'll probably need to know a little bit about the kinds of music and the problems associated with the project and what they're trying to do. And my preference is that you focus on a corpus of musical scores. Oops, sorry, it's too high up there. Scores that can be readable by Music 21 or something else. But if something really grabs you and you're like, this is the music I really like, and it's all audio or it's all images or something like that, go ahead and do that. Just the only 2 things I'm going to say, IMSLP and Wikipedia are out. Too obvious, right? I've given some places that you can begin. Some of them I was nice enough to give the links, and other ones I'm like, nah. And then some directories of projects, and what you're going to be asked for, URLs, screenshots, how deeply the questions you were answered. So hope that you'll find this kind of fun. It's due in a week. What I want to do is give you now 10 minutes to find the person that you want to do this work with. The only caveat is you cannot have been in the same PSET 2 group. That's just because when we do a lot of group work and you have group grades, I want to make sure that you're getting things from you. And so we rotate that around and start talking about what potential types of things you've seen or you've done. This is a good time to Google and mess around on the internet in class with your professor's blessing. A couple things going on here that just want to make sure that we get to. We're doing these big topics, corpus studies, representation, intervals, and stuff like that. But then along the way, there's a bunch of little things that will make your life easier that, like eventually you'll need to know how to deal with clefs and stuff. So make sure if you haven't been reading through parts of the Music 21 User's Guide that you that you continue to do that, and that this is a place when you want to know something. There is the user's guide and the complete reference. The complete reference doesn't really distinguish between what is important and what isn't, whereas hopefully we've done a decent job explaining that. You should have by now read through up to chapter 6 here. If you haven't, most MIT students probably won't need to go through chapter 5 on recursion and lists of lists if you're in this, but we've skipped chords and something called chordify for a bit. I think you can, we'll get to that later, but definitely start reading through the Music 21 object thing. What is a Music 21 object? You'll see durations are not Music 21 objects, so not everything that's in Music 21 is one. And basically, the easiest definition is that a Music 21 object is something that can go into a stream. It knows how to position itself, and it has a duration and some other things. So want to go through this at some point, just so that when I'm giving an assignment, everything's unlocked here, how you can give, who has worked with JavaScript DOM manipulation, like get elements by class? So quite a number of people have tried to make Music 21 to be a lot like the version of JavaScript that was around at the time in whenever it was, 2006, 2007. So there's things like get element by ID, get elements by group. Group is equivalent in Music 21 to JavaScript class, the class, so multiple things, the dot selector, so multiple things can be in the same group, and so on. And then there's a nice little discussion of the thing that will probably drive you baffled at some point, the active site, which is telling you which stream it is, and we still haven't figured out who, that one bug that we saw in class with the active site being wrong, or the get context by class being wrong. So this chapter just goes through the basic things, and it will tell you how to sort objects, which will sometimes be useful, how to move two things that are at the same place, and what sorting is. The next chapter has a little bit of the details on how things work, how you can transpose a note, and how you can get back from the transposed note to its original note, and so on, except you're not, yeah, I think transpose is about to be unlocked for you, right? Because you've just done all of this work. And a bunch of other little things. But that's kind of a little bit boring one. So read through that, read through the time signatures and beats and the keys and key signatures. This last one lets you do your first little algorithmic composition exercise where toward the very end, sorry, scrolling fast. Here we go, where we can create a little melody, something like this, and automatically change it and have, I don't know why size this goes, have a piece of music that I remember having to play a lot in junior high, and so on. So it's nice to make little algorithmic pieces before we write our first true algorithmic composition for, which will be problem set 8. So those are some of the things that you've probably been looking at. Also, optionally, you might want to go through clefs, articulations, and ornaments, and we'll do a little bit of that right now. We're not going to get time to get to intervals right now. Okay, so let's play with a little bit. So if you have a second and you have your laptop out, and if you have Jupyter able to be got up, sorry, I should have said that 5 minutes ago, like always. You know, like the way the conductor says, I want you to play a little bit louder and make sure to especially separate all the notes 32 measures after A, right? You know, the worst order. Yeah, so sorry about that. That's just me vamping while we give us a chance to. Who who cannot see a Jupyter notebook that's on, or I suppose you can all see mine. So given the time with 10 minutes, let's do a little bit of more work on things. So I'm going to import Corpus, stream, note, and meter, and I'm going to look at a couple other little things in a piece by Joseph Haydn. So Corpus, parse, I'm going to assign it to Haydn. Haydn, opus 1, number 1, movement 1. So that's the thing, give everybody a chance to do it, and you can show it when you're ready. This is the first string quartet that Haydn ever published. Pretty young. He was mostly an old man, thought of as a sort of an old man composer. And start with our close listening for even just a few seconds until, while I grab the recording of this. What's interesting about the opening to anybody? John.
It's in unison.
It's all in unison. Do we hear that's all in unison? I didn't give you the second page because I did it in the notebook. Just remember you can always show Haydn, show music xml.pdf to get it, or just to get the whole thing up. Okay, so it's all in unison at the beginning. We're not going to do another thing like we did with trying to figure out where are the notes outside the key and so on. But go ahead and tell me how many notes are there in this piece. So when you've got it, I'm not gonna call on the first person shout out. So, but let's just be sure we can still do something like that. So what is the question that we're trying to do? Somebody.
How many notes are there?
How many notes are there in this piece? So who hasn't been called on very much? Check you haven't been called on. Usually I pick on you too much. What did you do on your thing? I'm going to assume you started with Haydn dot something.
Yeah, I just did it. I did it
Four. Okay, good.
I did 4 N and Haydn, and then index note, and I counted.
Note dot note.
Counters.
Counter, good. I equals 0, right? I plus equals 1, and then I, good. And so we use the, what kind of iteration does this do? Recurse, good. So somebody get that number? That's good. I saw a lot of 4s in the middle there. What's another way we could do this? Somebody have a different way? Yeah.
Haydn dot recurse dot get elements.
Haydn dot recurse dot get elements by class note dot note, and then
Length. Oh,
length. Yep. Yeah, it's when you forget to put that at the beginning that you really wish Python were more like JavaScript or Java, where you could just do dot length at the end. But yep, good. Any other ways that people did? Okay, enough note counting. By the way, you hope that that this should, Len, also get something pretty similar. So flattening. It doesn't matter which order you're iterating through, you're still going to hit every single thing, right? Good. Okay, so let's grab the viola part. I'm going to call it VLA equals, and take the second to see if you can remember how to do that. And what the question is going to be, this will be one of the second to last thing, get the viola part and let's change its clef to treble clef because a little bit harder for us to read who are not violists.
You don't lay down clefs then. What does it say? None.
You might need to, from Music 21, import clef. I can't remember. Has everyone gotten the, raise your hand if you've gotten the viola part out, even if you not get the clef. Good, good. Okay, so I'm going to put in what I did to get that. Haydn dot parts viola. Notice it's not case sensitive, and let me just make sure I got the right one. You could also have done index 1, 2, 3, 2, right? Good. So keep going on that. So I'm going to go through a couple ways I did it. Viola, we call it alto clef, hopefully. It's that equals what? Viola clef dot first. Hopefully that's right. Or viola dot recurse dot get elements by class clef, whatever. So you do this, and here's one of the ways that you could do that. I'll just give the the way that's probably not the best way, but looking at the time, I'll explain the best way later. We can put it as a G2 clef. We're going to change it, and piece should be beginning with a bunch of B flats, and it still is. So that's one way to do it. I want to just point out two things here. Notice we did not change the stem directions of anything, so it looks a little bit weird. It looks very weird when you go from treble clef to bass clef or something like that. The other thing is, what do you call it, alto C. That now we have a particular subclass of clefs, so that clefs are in a taxonic, or alto clef is in a taxonomy or monony with a generic clef.
Taxonomy.
Alto clef is another clef. Great. So we might be having a problem. We might need to see if there's a way we can actually replace it with another clef. Thank you. I did broke my promise. You're 20 seconds late. So thanks. Great class.